How much?
How much you gotta spend?
Frank, this is more than a month's salary.
Out here, it is all about our hustle.
You really have to take us to the station.
We're everywhere. We have been everywhere for a really long time.
Yes, work! Yes, work! Yes, work! Yes, work! Know that whore! Know that whore! Just that boss!
Welcome back to The Oldest Profession, the show about the irreverent history of audacious whores. I'm so excited to promote and to recommend Evian Whitney and her incredible podcast, The Sexually Liberated Woman. Now, longtime listeners of the podcast know that we talk about a lot of sexually liberated women from history. But if you want to sexually liberate yourself, I can't recommend Evian Whitney's podcast, The Sexually Liberated Woman, enough. I just learned to come 2 years ago. So I'm not an expert on this, but Evian Whitney interviews experts, talks about her own sexual journey, and is just chock full of resources for getting in touch with the sacred feminine that lives within all of us. Speaking of the sacred ancient feminine, I am so excited to introduce today's topic, the ancient fertility goddess, Tlazōlteōtl. Tlazōlteōtl was a goddess associated with the moon, the cycle of the generation, death, and regeneration, and also of agriculture. So she is essentially a cycle goddess who was called by the Spanish conquerors the goddess of filth. She's not just the goddess of trash and filth and human excrement or bodily discharges, but she is also the goddess of rejuvenation and cleansing that process. So it's interesting how when Western colonizers come, specifically the Spanish, one of the first things that they do is try to put Tlazōlteōtl into this sinful woman witch box and separate her from her cyclical nature and try to flatten her as a goddess, when in Aztec culture and Mesoamerican culture, in the indigenous culture, she is this complex, multifaceted life cycle goddess that is about both provoking lust and also forgiving lust. Tlazōlteōtl was such a powerful goddess that at the end of one's life, very old people could call on her once in their life in order to absolve them of all of their sins. She is also called in the beginning of one's life to newborn infants to absolve the newborn baby of its parents' sins. So she is a complex goddess, and she's associated with the two major crops of the Mesoamerican world where she comes from, which is the Gulf Coast area. She's associated with maize, or what we would call corn, which is the dietary staple of most tribes in this region, and also with cotton. Cotton is a really interesting crop because it's associated with female sexuality, spinning, weaving, and the spinning needle have a lot of sexual connotations, and there are lots of fun, suggestive poems from this period that make those connections. And also, the literal plant, cotton bark, is used to treat menstrual cramps and is also used to, wink wink, induce menstruation. I want to talk about one of the fertility rituals that reminds me in this sort of ancient, powerful way. If, longtime listeners of the podcast might remember the Ishtar episode. She has some very similar qualities to this ancient, powerful fertility goddess who is also deeply associated with old prose. Tlazōlteōtl would be called to do a community fertility ritual where priests with hyper-extended paper phalluses that were brightly colored and painted would do a dance of symbolic seduction, right? Where the cycle of penetration, orgasm, and conception would happen ritualistically, possibly symbolically, possibly not. Kind of depends on the era, depends on which archaeologist you're listening to. And then Tlazōlteōtl, after the successful seduction and conception act, would then symbolically castrate the priest by taking away their hyperextended phalluses and replacing them with brooms to clean the community. So it really is this rejuvenation cycle. She was worshipped by many people, including the Aztecs and also the Hostas. She is a provoker and pardoner. So one of the symbols associated with Tlazōlteōtl is a painted black mouth, which involves like the literal eating of shit or the literal eating of dirt, which was associated with this like regenerative goddess that was like very much in filth and a part of turning that excrement or turning that waste into fertility, which is something that the earth literally does to, both scat and also decomposing bodies, is like turning that waste product into fertile ground. And so this was embodied in the goddess. And a fun fact, actually, about pregnant women is that they often shit during the birthing process. So Tlazōlteōtl is very much a moon goddess. She's associated with the 4 stages of the moon, which was tied to 4 sisters who were sometimes women that died in childbirth that would then be deified. So, if you wanted to be a goddess in the ancient world, just die of childbirth, which is like you got a 50-50 shot of that anyway, right? Before penicillin. Anyway, look, life is dark. That's why you need a regenerative goddess. Tlazōlteōtl is associated with these 4 moon goddesses and is very much associated with the carnality of female sexuality and the power of seduction and what it means to both seduce and also absolve. And so I love this idea of a goddess that provokes sin while simultaneously acting as the confessor and very much a forgiveness goddess of like provoking excess and then turning that excess into a regenerative fertility symbol. So she's very much like the goddess of Carnival, of like, get drunk, get high, fuck too much. That's cool. It means we're going to have a great crop this year. It doesn't mean that you'll burn in hell forever. Speaking of hellfire and brimstone, when the Spanish invade the Aztecs and Mesoamerica, the Spanish conquistadors come down, wrecking havoc and carnage, and it is literal, the genocidal takeover of this part of the world. They don't know what to do with this bitch. Like, they see Tlazōlteōtl, and of course, anyone who's familiar with colonizing history knows that it begins with with priests and with missionaries who come over representing the Catholic Church that immediately try to pigeonhole Tlazōlteōtl into Eve, right? Because she is the seducer of men. She is the fallen woman. She is filthy. They also associate her with Venus and these sort of carnal goddesses, which is like 1/4 of what this female deity goddess represents. And so I think it speaks to the limitations on these mostly male conquistadors and their inability to conceive of a multidimensional woman, right? Like, you are this or you are that, right? So they completely excise the maternal motherhood, midwife elements of this ancient fertility goddess and instead just replace her with the fallen woman narrative, perpetuating this myth that you can't be a whore and a mother at the same time, which, as any listener of the podcast knows, is like that's never been true. Like, whores have been moms the whole time. You can be a virgin, a sex worker, and a mother in the same lifetime. So they arrive and they try to fit the Tlazōlteōtl into this Eve myth as the fallen woman, and they have a really hard time getting the people to abandon this very powerful goddess. So the ancient, they wrote a lot of books about this, the letters home, whining about the uncivilized, unconquerable people of the Gulf Coast and their inability to let go of their trash goddess, right? And so if you listen to the priests and the conquerors, they talk about this, like this gross, like excrement eating, whore of Babylon-y, disgusting woman that cannot be pried out of the hands of the people. And what you see is this ongoing, unwinnable war to suppress and to defile this ancient goddess that represents so beautifully and powerfully the life cycle, the generation, death, and rebirth, right? The shitting and eating, right? The fertilizer into fertility, the death giving birth to life, which causes death, and the cyclical nature of that. And it is just so far past the imagination and the comprehension of the Catholics that want to divide the world into one of two places, heaven or hell, virgin or whore, good or bad. And I think that this represents like one of the ongoing tensions of our culture and the inability to like fucking deal with the existence of sex workers and our role as healers and keepers of this ancient knowledge, not just about the body, but I think that one of the things that really spoke to me reading for the first time about Tlazōlteōtl was how her role of confessor, her role of absolver. I can't tell you how many clients I've had or how many other sex workers I've spoken to that take on this role with their clients of hearing about the parts of themselves that they cannot share in other parts of their life. And I think that you're hearkening back to like some ancient fertility goddess shit and this like Tlazōlteōtl role of being like, yes, I am provoking you to lust and I am absolving you of that sin and sending you back out into the world to be a wholer person. I don't know. Wholer, holy, whore. We're making up words. In the 16th and 17th century, one of the efforts that the conquistadors, and specifically the priests, had was they were printing these texts where they would reproduce an image of Tlazōlteōtl, and then they would have all these texts about like what a filthy, dirty whore monster she was, and like how gross and disgusting and filthy she was. And what was so funny is the absolute disconnect between the Spanish European writers of this text and the indigenous people that they were trying to communicate with. So what they were effectively doing was reproducing and preserving images of this ancient, powerful fertility goddess that was widely worshipped by the people. And they would see these images and know immediately what they meant based on like the oral history that was passed down and memories of these fertility traditions. And they couldn't read the text because it wasn't in their language. Like they weren't being taught to read. They were being mostly worked to death when they weren't dying of smallpox. And then on the other side, to the Europeans, these images were completely incomprehensible. So there's this strange disconnect where one culture, right, the colonizers, are only reading the words on the page, and the indigenous people are only looking at the images on the page. And so it's this like multi-generational disconnect that ends up only serving the confirmation biases of both peoples. To speak about prostitution in a pre-capitalist world is a little bit of a tricky subject. Now, Tlazōlteōtl is absolutely the goddess of adulterers, the goddess of seduction, the goddess of sexual excess. And the Aztecs housed the Temple of Women, which is something that we would call, and archaeologists have called, a brothel, a place where ritualized sex between unmarried people would happen in exchange for money. Now, whether this money was going to the temple and the priestess and the goddess, or whether it was being paid for services, either way, I'm calling these bitches old pros. Tlazōlteōtl is an ancient, powerful sexual fertility goddess that took from men and inspired lust in men and transformed that lust into important things for the community. So in that way, she is a transformative goddess, taking sexual energy and transforming it into things that we need, right? Literally castrating priests after a successful conception and giving them brooms to clean up the community, and the same kind of ancient witchcraft that all sex workers are involved in, of like taking that magical sexual energy and turning it into money or housing or anything that we need. Sex work manifests itself differently in all of the forms that we practice it, from client to client, from form to form. Tlazōlteōtl is the goddess of adulterers. She is the goddess of seduction. She is the goddess of sexual excess. And the ancient Aztec Empire, it was in the temple of Tlazōlteōtl that housed the house of women, or what we would call a brothel, where women would transform this sacred sexual energy, this ancient power, into things that the community needs. And this is, I can't think of a better symbol of this than the ritual of Tlazōlteōtl literally castrating male priests after a successful conception and replacing their useless dicks with brooms so that they can clean up the community after their experience of sexual excess, and like excising this, I don't want to call it a demon, but like excising this this energy that is better used to clean the community than it is to say, like, I don't know, rape and pillage or whatever it is we're using it for now. What sex workers do, and what I think makes us so powerful and therefore like dangerous and threatening, is that we also transform this deep, ancient, sacred sexual energy into money, into housing, into clothes, into education, into all of the things that we need. In essence, doing what Tlazōlteōtl did in turning shit into gold, turning excrement and filth and trash and the leftover sexual energy of society into this through this transformative process into art, into the money that we need into the money that we need to live our lives. And so I think sex workers unconsciously, I mean, I hadn't heard of Tlazōlteōtl until I started researching her for this episode, are unconsciously living out the beautiful circle of life represented by this ancient fertility goddess in taking excess sexual energy and transforming it into money that we use for food and clothing and shelter, that we use to make art, that we use to connect to other people, that we use to live our best lives, using this ancient, powerful sexual energy to magically transform ourselves into ancient sexual goddesses that act as both provokers of sexual lust and absolvers of sin. Thank you so much for listening. This has been The Oldest Profession, and thanks as always to our patrons. We really couldn't do it without you. Speaking of patrons, we're starting a new initiative. We're not going to be releasing episodes every week because I got a new job. I'm part of a national campaign to decriminalize sex work. We're pursuing a state-by-state strategy, and it's really exciting. Every week, I'm going to be keeping a audio diary where I talk about the process, about who we're talking to, traveling all over the country, talking to legislators and lobbyists and activists and community organizers about our efforts to finally decriminalize the oldest profession. So for only $5 a month, that is a floor but not a ceiling. You can absolutely give more to support our efforts. You can listen in as I talk about the crazy hotel rooms and the weird legislators and the quirky lobbyists and all of the ups and downs that come with running a campaign. Thanks, as always, to our brilliant producer, Justine McClellan. The podcast would not be the same without her. She makes me sound way smarter than I am, and as my father would say, keeps us on course and on glide path. Tlazōlteōtl. I feel spittle is what's happening. I feel like I'm spitting. Tlazōlteōtl.